For his new book, Going Clear, Scientology, Hollywood, and the Prison of Belief, Wright conducted more than 200 personal interviews of former and current Scientologists in the course of his investigation and delved into droves of archives. The book is a fearless and in-depth look into the world of Scientology. Let's learn more about it. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lawrence Wright and Mark Updegrove.
Thank you, Lois. Thank you, guys. Thanks so much. Well, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you. You have taken on many daunting subjects in your literary works. What led you to take on Scientology and Going Clear?
Well, I've always been interested in why people believe one thing rather than another, especially in America where you can believe anything. You know, it's not every country is like that. In many countries I've been in, you can only believe one thing. You can believe it more or less, but you really, the menu is not very, very big. But here, you have this smorgasbord of beliefs. And if you don't see something, you can invent something. So, and why do people gravitate to these different beliefs? And what does it say about them? So I've written a lot about religion in my career. I've written about the Mormons and the Amish and the Satanists, even Madeleine Mary O'Hare, the atheist who used to live here. I've many, many different religions. And of course, in my last book before this one, Radical Islam in the Looming Tower. So, but Scientology seemed especially intriguing because it's so bizarre, esoteric, and then you have all these notable personalities who lend their prestige to what is the most stigmatized religion in the country. And I don't think that they get anything out of being affiliated with Scientology publicly. In fact, I think they suffer a kind of public relations martyrdom for their religious beliefs. So why? Why do they do this? That's what led me into it. I think there was questions that most people had about Scientology.
So the Church of Scientology is well known for being wealthy, defensive, and litigious.
Yeah.
Did you fear reprisals, legal and otherwise, in your investigating Scientology?
Well, we thought about it. I mean, I talked to the editor of the New Yorker, David Remnick, several years ago about my interest in writing about Scientology. And we were aware of the reputation of the church. There was one really notable example in 1991. Time magazine published an expose. Richard Bayar was a reporter. And the church sued Time magazine and Bayar individually. And they hired private investigators to go through his mail and his telephone records and follow him around. But the church lost at every stage along the way, all the way up to the Supreme Court. It took 10 years to resolve. It was the most, even though Time magazine won, it cost them more than any suit in their history. And so that was a caution. I think the whole press, was after that was chastened by the example. So we thought about it. And then Paul Haggis dropped out of Scientology. He was a 2-time Academy Award winner. And he was very much in that world that I was intrigued by. And it was too good. It was too good to pass up. And so when he agreed to the interview, I figured that this was my real chance to finally write something about why people like Paul Haggis, an intelligent, skeptical, creative, intriguing human being. Where did he go in order to surrender himself to the tenets of the Church of Scientology?
We'll get back to Paul Haggis in a moment, but I'm wondering, has the church rattled legal sabers over this?
Oh yeah, we had innumerable legal threats, and fortunately, you know, I very stalwart. I had the magazine, and you know, when you're working for the New Yorker, you're surrounded by great people, and we had eventually we had 7 fact checkers on that story, and you know, one attorney. I was a little worried about that because when the Scientologists came to our magazine to confront us, you know, about what we were about to write, they brought 4 lawyers, and they have lots of lawyers, but
4 lawyers and 47 white binders, as I recall.
That's right. We had sent 971 fact-checking queries. That was the first volley, and it was like dead quiet for a while, and then suddenly, you know, I had been trying to get them to talk to me, and they wouldn't talk to me. So suddenly, this delegation, the church's chief spokesperson, Tommy Davis, and his wife and assistant, and these 4 lawyers came with these legal binders, and they stretched out 7 linear feet, and these were supposed to be responses to our 971 queries. And I don't know if they thought they were going to drown me in information, but you can't drown a reporter in information. It's like pouring water on a fish. You know, it's like I couldn't believe it. I was so full of joy. And when the meeting was finally over, I got a dolly and I took all those binders down to this disused computer room in the New Yorker offices, and I lined them all up on the desk, and I just looked at them, you know, just with such pleasure, because I knew that inside there, you know, just as during this epic meeting, is kind of legendary now at the New Yorker, during a bathroom break, David Remnick pulled me aside and said, "Well, you know what you got here, you schmuck. You got a book." Yeah. Yeah, David, I know.
Well, speaking of books, today just so happens to be the 63rd anniversary of the publication of Dianetics, which spawned the whole Scientology movement. It was written by L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of the church, this very idiosyncratic, esoteric church, as you mentioned. Talk about L. Ron Hubbard and how he came to found Scientology.
L. Ron Hubbard was born in 1911 in Tilden, Nebraska, and raised in Montana. But he's the most interesting person I think I've ever had the chance to write about. For one reason, there's all these contradictions in these 2 narratives that have sprung up around his life. The L. Ron Hubbard's narrative, the one the church endorses and defends, is that he was a very adventurous young man, and there's no question about that. He was. He was maybe a little less adventurous than he appeared to be, you know, but because he embellished his stories. But he went off on expeditions, and then became a famous pulp fiction writer during the 30s and 40s in America, and especially in science fiction. And this was an era when the pulps paid a penny a word. So you had to write a lot of words to make a living. And he wrote a lot of words, 100,000 words a month. And he had a roll of butcher paper that he would roll into his IBM Selectric. And then he would just type, you know, so fast that one of his close friends said he would physically perspire, and then he'd come to the end of the story, take a T-square, rip it out, and roll in the next one, and he had, you know, out of that discipline, he has become the Guinness Book of World Records title holder for the most number of books published, more than 1,000. So he went off to war in the Navy. And he came back, and according to the church's narrative, he was heroic. He was a hero in the war, and he was badly wounded, blinded and crippled. Medicine couldn't help him. He was in the Oakland Naval Hospital, and he began to treat himself with these techniques that he later developed into Dianetics. And he left he became part of a magic circle in Southern California, black magic circle, and ran off with the chief magician's girlfriend. And then he and that girlfriend got married, and he was already married, however. He didn't inform her of that. And then he went up to New Jersey, and in 1950, he wrote Dianetics, a book of more than 450 pages, in a month. And it was published almost immediately. And it dominated the New York Times bestseller list. In fact, it actually, in some ways, created the category of self-help books that became so popular after World War II.
This is 1950 when it was published.
1950.
Right? Yeah.
And Dianetics clubs, this is kind of a self-help therapy that he had invented. And these clubs started up all over America and in other countries. And it was kind of similar and contemporaneous to the hula hoop. It just, everybody did it. And and he got immensely wealthy, and within a couple of years he lost all his money. He even lost the rights to the name Dianetics. And he told many people that the way to make real money is by starting a church. So in 1954, in Los Angeles, he started the Church of Scientology. And he chose Los Angeles for good reason. He had the prescience to understand that one thing Americans really do worship is celebrity. Mm-hmm. And in addition to the church, he created the Celebrity Center in Hollywood. In fact, now the church is one of the main landlords in all of Hollywood. And they would go out and try to bring in famous people. And the church published a roster of prospective Scientologists, and they were Walt Disney, Bob Hope, Marlene Dietrich, Howard Hughes. Some of the most famous people ever, but they wanted these celebrity pitchmen. They actually did have, for Gloria Swanson, her papers are over here in the HRC, and the correspondence between her and Hubbard is very intriguing. But she was a fated star of silent movies, and Rock Hudson came in for a while. In those early days, there were many other celebrities that followed, but from the very beginning, they targeted famous people because they knew that if they could draw them in and have these celebrity pitchmen, then people would pay attention to Scientology. And he was right about that. Now, the problem with the church's narrative and L. Ron Hubbard's narrative is that I got all of his medical records and his military records. He was never injured in the war. Right. He had ulcers and conjunctivitis, but he was not blinded and crippled. And
stomach problems and pink eye don't care.
He at that meeting at the New Yorker, there was I was asking Tommy Davis about the discrepancies, and because the official records say one thing, you say something else, and he said, "Well, we wondered about that too." And so, have you ever seen JFK, the Oliver Stone movie? And I said, "Sure." You know Mr. X? Yes, I remember Mr. X. This mysterious thing. Well, we hired him, and Fletcher Prouty, and he explained to us that there were actually two sets of records, and the records were sheep-dipped. There's a term I had never run into before. But that means that there was another set of records somewhere that had the real actions of L. Ron Hubbard, the intelligence agent. And so they sent me what's essentially a release from the military. And it listed, all these medals that he had won. and ships he had served on. And one of the first things that gave it away was that it said that he had had 4 years of schooling at George Washington University, but he dropped out after 2. But we started, we sent an intern down to St. Louis where the military archives are kept, and we filed a Freedom of Information suit, and we got 900 pages of all of his military records, and I found the original discharge, and it was a completely different document. And, he had several medals, none for valor, just service medals. And here on the one the church gave me, it was choked with all these medals, some from foreign countries. Some of the medals hadn't even been created yet. And they sent me a photograph of the medals, and it didn't correspond to the ones, it was a transparent fraud. And yet, out of that, one of the things that Tommy said at the meeting was, if it's true that L. Ron Hubbard was never injured in the war, then Dianetics is a lie and Scientology is based upon a lie. The fact is that L. Ron Hubbard was a hero, and that's the narrative the church still believes.
How does one get pulled into the Church of Scientology typically? Is there kind of a pattern that you see where people get sort of absorbed into Scientology?
Yeah, there are different kinds of, pathways, but characteristically, you have people who are seekers, people who are looking for something, and if they were to walk across the drag and go into the Church of Scientology, they would be, possibly they'd be given a personality assessment or an intelligence test, but they would be asked, what is ruining your life? What is your ruin, as they say? What's standing in the way of your personal, professional, emotional, spiritual happiness? And there'll be something. And, we can help you with that. We have a menu of courses that you can take. And people are helped by these things. Like Jerry Seinfeld still credits a communications course he took at Scientology with helping him have the nerve to be a stand-up comedian. I'm not disputing that people can be helped by taking courses that address their needs. You'll also be offered auditing, which is the form of Scientology therapy. And what's different from regular therapy is that between you and your therapist, who's called an auditor, there is what's called an e-meter. And an e-meter is 2 tin cans. They used to be Campbell's soup cans with the labels scraped off, and a wire that connects you to a meter that your auditor is looking at, and a small indetectable current passes through. Now, what's going on with that? Scientologists say that it's measuring the mass of your thoughts. Well, there's no evidence thoughts have mass, but what we know that it measures is your galvanic skin response. It's 1/3 of a lie detector. And just imagine if you were in a therapeutic situation with the lie detector. It does change the equation, but it's also very persuasive instrument, because if you believe in its accuracy, and Hubbard thought it could see just below the level of consciousness. In other words, it knew more about you than you did. Then what you say in this meeting, is verified by this meter, becomes very powerful. And oftentimes in the Scientology auditing, people are asked, if you had a fight with your wife, you'll be asked, can you remember an experience when you were younger? Yeah, my mom scolded me, just like that. Or, can you, go back further? And every once in a while, people say, well, I can't go back any further. But, well, what was that? The needle just moved on the meter. I don't know. I just had an image of a barn. Well, go back into that barn. And what do you see? And then walk outside. What does it look like? Well, it looks like 18th century France. This is a real memory. The meter says is real. And really, what do you see? And, well, they're soldiers. And now, if you've had the experience of suddenly discovering that you've lived before, this is good news. You've lived before, you'll live again. This is one of the things that Scientology promises, that you're an eternal spirit called a thetan. And you will always live. And what Scientology does is it discloses the truth of your immortality so that you don't forget it in another lifetime. And we want to break the cycle, because what mankind does is continually gain this greater level of technical ability and then destroy the planet, and we have to start all over again. And so Scientology's mission is to clear the planet, make everybody aware of these truths that Hubbard discovered. And that way we won't go through that cycle again.
It seems like one of the goals is to remove obstacles from your life, including what are called SPs, or suppressive persons. Can you talk a little bit about that?
If you go into Scientology and you say, what is ruining your life? I'm just not getting ahead in my job, and my wife is constantly making me feel like I should be doing better. Well, maybe she's part of the problem. And sometimes there are people who suppress what is really you. And you have to keep your distance from them. Now, one way that you become suppressive really quickly is if you say, don't go to the Church of Scientology. And if your child or your spouse or somebody close to you goes into the Church of Scientology and you say, I think you should keep your distance, sooner or later it's very likely that that person who's been issuing these warnings will be declared a suppressive person. And if it's your child, you're not going to be allowed to speak to your mother. Or I just got a call this morning from a woman whose son disconnected from her. And I can't tell you how many tears are in this story, because these are really tragic events. She hadn't seen her son for years. And it happens he's working here in Austin in a motorcycle shop. And she found out where she was, and she went and surprised him. And I hope that there can be a reconciliation, but what he wants her to do is go back to the church. It's these forcible separations they're just heart-wrenching. Yeah. And, I don't know how, nobody really knows how many Scientologists there are. The figures they put forward are made up. They say 8 to 10 million. The census data and poll data in the U.S. show about 25,000 people who identify themselves as Scientologists, which is half the number that say they're Rastafarians. But there are so many instances of families broken apart that I'm convinced the scale of this is much larger than that poll data shows.
But they are disproportionately wealthy as a religion, indisputably, no matter how many members they have. It just seems they have accrued enormous wealth. How has that wealth built up over time?
Well, it started actually after that Time suit. They needed a war chest, and Scientology back in the 80s, L. Ron Hubbard had decided not to pay taxes, and so by 1993, the church owed $1 billion in back taxes, and it didn't have $1 billion at that time. So they faced an existential moment. They had to be given a tax exemption by the IRS, or they go out of business. So the way that David Miscavige, the current leader of the church, went about it was to file 2,400 lawsuits against the IRS and individual agents to hire IRS, to hire private detectives to follow IRS agents around out-of-town conventions to see who is drinking too much or fooling around, and then publishing, material about that. Whatever the merits of the case was, part of the deal the IRS made with the Church of Scientology was that they would drop all those lawsuits and call off the private investigators. So they forgave the $1 billion. And they declared the Church of Scientology a religion, and therefore it's entitled to all the vast protections that the First Amendment guarantees. One of the things the church came out of that experience thinking, we need more money. And so they began building up their war chest for defending themselves in such cases. And now they've amassed, according to former executives, well over $1 billion in liquid assets, mostly in offshore accounts.